Hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting episode. Today, we're not going to build anything, but we will take today's episode and go through why some of the big companies move away from jQuery and why certainly it is important to realize, even though jQuery is obviously the best sort of library in terms of working with DOM elements of your page and also do all sort of Ajax calls and backend calls from front end, why people move away from it and why we and specifically I, who really was using like jQuery for almost all the tutorials in the past, started moving away from it and started using the vanilla JavaScript. So I thought that basically GitHub put up this article on their engineering website, which is githubengineering.com. I'll put this link down there. You can go ahead and read through it, but I thought it's a great idea if we do it together. And then I can just dive in and talk a little bit more about what they mean. So let's get started. Why jQuery made sense early on. So github.com pulled in jQuery 1.2.1 as a dependency in late 2007. For a bit of context, that was a year before Google released the first version of their Chrome browser. So even at the time, Chrome browser didn't exist. So there was no standard way to query DOM elements by a CSS selector, no standard way to animate visual styles of an element, and obviously, the XML HTTP request interface pioneered by the Internet Explorer was, like many other APIs, inconsistent between browsers. So what it really is talking about here is that at the time there was no one solution, no one sort of cross-browser compatible solution to sort of work with the DOM, and also the API or the interface that you usually do your sort of calls against an backend API that was not consistent between browsers, right? So that was the reason why jQuery made sense at the time. And jQuery made it simple to manipulate the DOM, define animations, make the so-called Ajax requests. Basically, it enabled web developers to create more modern, dynamic experiences that stood out from the rest, right? Most importantly of all, the JavaScript features built in one browser with jQuery would generally work in other browsers too, right? So basically, this is talking about cross-browser compatibility. In those early days of GitHub, when most of its features were still getting fleshed out, this allowed the small development team to prototype rapidly and get new features out the door without having to adjust code specifically for each web browser. So this is a really good important point. Again, jQuery is an awesome library. You can go ahead and obviously use it. Nowadays, people start not using it. They start using vanilla JavaScript because a little bit further on in the document, it talks about why you can use vanilla JavaScript and but what really it says here is that if you are doing a prototype and you know, as most of the front-end developers, how to work with jQuery, obviously go ahead and use it for sure. I'm using it all the time when I'm building some really quick prototypes for, customers, or, if it's like a sort of a toy project that I'm developing, or I'm talking somewhere, I want to like demo something. I definitely use jQuery, but more and more recently I started like using really the main vanilla JavaScript instead of jQuery, and we'll get down there and see why. So now let's talk about web standards in the later years, which right now in 2019, uh, it definitely means that we support all of these, and the JavaScript supports all of these. So let's take it here. Over the years, GitHub grew into a company with hundreds of engineers, and a dedicated team gradually formed to take responsibility for the size and quality of JavaScript code that we serve to web browsers. So what it really means is that most of the companies really think about not only like delivering value to the user, but also maintainability of their code, right? Uh, One of the things that we are constantly on the lookout for is technical debt. And sometimes technical debt grows around dependencies that once provided value, but whose value dropped over time. And they're talking about jQuery in this sense, right? When it came to jQuery, we compared it against the rapid evolution of evolution of supported web standards in modern browsers and realized the following. So in the last tutorial, one of our awesome fans talked about the fact that we could obviously write a little bit less code using jQuery. So instead of using for each or class list, we can definitely go ahead and use the actual $sign kind of selector of jQuery and all, for the same reason. But now if you look at these items here, which I'm going right now, you could see why it's also easy to not include jQuery, but also use the vanilla JavaScript API. So the selector, the jQuery selector pattern can easily be replaced with query selector all, right? So if you know $sign selector, you pass a class name or an identifier or an ID, and then it goes ahead and select what you need, right? So you can use query selector all nowadays and it will work in all the browsers. And also for one single element, you can use obviously query selector. CSS class name switching can now be achieved using element.classList. Again, in the previous tutorial, when we created an accordion, we used this, of course. Then CSS now supports defining visual animations in style sheets rather than in JavaScript. And they're talking about basically the animation and keyframes sort of styles. And it's kind of like this one is debatable because not all the animations you can do using CSS. So I would take this point really interesting. Obviously, there are so many things you can do nowadays with CSS animations that you couldn't do and you had to use JavaScript for it. And I give it to them about this, but definitely some of the animations you really need to use JavaScript. And the Ajax request calls can be performed using the fetch standards. And this is again one of the tutorials we did. Like I guess it was like two second or the third tutorials before this that we talked about fetch standard and we used fetch standard. Go ahead and take a look at it if you are not familiar with it. And then the other point is the add event listener interface is stable enough for cross-platform use. So in many of my tutorials, recent tutorials, you can see that I'm using this. Basically, this is how we add an event listener, like click or key down, key up, or key press, or any kind of event listener. And you can be sure that it will work in all the browsers. Then we could easily encapsulate the event delegation pattern with a lightweight library. I mean, this is not a big thing. If you need event delegation, definitely, click on it and go read about it. I'm not going to be focused too much on this one. And then some syntactic sugars that jQuery provides has become redundant with the evolution of JavaScript language. So one of the things they talk about is this piece of code. Basically, this means that, the element or elements with the JS widget sort of class, add class is loading to it and then show it, right? So why this is, well, obviously this is like the easiest way you can write code. But my question to you is that, is this talking about one element with the JS widget class? When you read this without knowing the context of the application or the general architecture of the application, do you know if this is talking about one element, talking about multiple elements or not? This is one of the reasons that it is important to use query selector all or query selector, right? With the vanilla JavaScript APIs, you really easily can realize whether this JS widget class is only one element that is referenced in JavaScript or is it like multiple elements. And that is definitely when you use query selector all, you can go ahead and use for each in JavaScript and go ahead through the elements and do something about it, right? As they say here, the syntax is simple to write, but to our standards, doesn't communicate intent really well. Did the author expect one or more JS widgets elements on this page? Also, if we update our page markup and accidentally leave out the JS widget class name, will an exception in the browser inform us that something's wrong? Well, obviously jQuery silently skips the whole expression when nothing match, right? And in many ways I can tell you you really want to know specifically if you develop a production code, you really want to know if there is an exception, right? There's a bunch of other tutorials here, a bunch of other information here. I'm not going to go through this. It's not relevant to this episode. And then they talk about how they literally used it to sort of they literally did incremental decoupling, went ahead in small portions in an iteration way to sort of decouple from the jQuery and using the vanilla JavaScript. So my point here again, kind of finalizing my thoughts here, again, jQuery is not at all a very bad or a bad sort of library. Go ahead and use it. I still use it in prototypes. But maybe when you write production code, or definitely you as fans of this channel, you watch these whether you're working somewhere or you want to get a job interview, work as a software developer, it's very important for if you want to do front end development or a full stack development, it's very important to know these concepts, to be able to talk about these concepts. And this is really what the job owners or the employers look for, right? The technical, they really want to know that you know what you know and what you're on. And these are important because like big companies like GitHub or Google or Spotify or all of these actually started moving away from. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any comment, any concern, please go ahead and put it in the comment section. I really enjoy these days people start talking and giving feedback and giving out their thoughts, and it's very important for us to be able to share our thoughts and do as best as we can to kind of improve and evolve in terms of getting the knowledge in front end and also in general in computer science. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, again, go ahead and do like and share. Again, thank you so much, and I wish you a great day and night, and talk to you in the next episode where we will definitely build something awesome. Goodbye.